And we're back with another week of my DIY budget restoration on the UK's cheapest Harley Davidson. Now, most of you will know that I bought this Harley Davidson Sportster about 2 months ago for just £1,000, and the bike was a total wreck. And over the last 2 months, I've been putting in a lot of work on this bike and learning a lot of new skills in order to get it back on the road. And while the bike still needs a lot of attention around the engine, this lower part of the frame, and the fuel tank, you could argue that the bike is starting to come together. Because from lots of angles, the bike is starting to look like somebody actually cares for it. If you remember, these forks were all corroded and horrible. The front part of the frame was all rusty and all the paint flaking. And the same story down here at the swing arm, which, as you can see, it's all now painted and treated. And a similar story for this rear section of the frame. And it's a similar story for lots of the small parts like the foot pegs, the exhaust balance pipe, the actual exhausts, the rear belt guard. There's lots of parts that I've obviously restored already, including the rear mud guard, which actually is looking pretty good if I say so myself. Now, I know the finish on some of the bits that I've done is not fantastic. At the end of the day, I'm not a professional. I'm just a bloke who's learning to do these things as he goes along. But personally, I think I'm doing a decent job, and little by little, I am saving this bike from the scrapyard that it probably would have ended up in otherwise. So let's crack on with the job that I left a bit unfinished in the last video, and that is the fuel tank, because while I've stripped down pretty much the entire outside of the tank, I've still got all this old paint and paint stripper residue and everything down the middle of the tank, and that all needs to come off so that we can get the best finish possible on this tank when it goes off for paint. So for the final bit of prep on this tank, I am literally just going around it with a die grinder with a poly disc on the end, and I'm just working it round all the little cracks and crevices, trying to get off the remaining paint, the paint stripper residue, and anything else on this tank, and taking it all back to bare metal wherever possible. Now, for the rest of the prep on this tank, you may remember that I used an angle grinder with a poly disc on it, and that's because they were big open flat surfaces that I could get the angle grinder onto. For this inside part of the tank, it is quite a tight, compact space, so the die grinder was the only real way to get in there, which did make it a bit more of a challenge because it is quite slow going, and you have to keep moving the tank around because of the lack of access. Okay, that's enough of that. I've got off as much of the old paint and everything as possible. The tank is pretty much nice and smooth. Obviously needs a bit of high build primer and a bit of sanding or whatever, but it's now in the hands of the paint shop to do all of that, because I do want a really nice finish on the tank, and that's just not something I'm going to be able to achieve myself. Now, I know this is a DIY restoration, but there are just a few things that, you know, it is better to leave to somebody who knows what they're doing. So it could be a couple of weeks again before we see the tank, because like I said, it all depends on how busy the paint shop is and how quickly they can get it done, etc, etc. But it's now in the hands of the professionals on that one. Okay, so now I'm going to turn my attention to a bit of cleaning up on all these engine casings and parts that I can actually get to, because obviously that's a mess. Obviously all this paint on the engine, it does just flake off, so I pretty much need to take all of that paint off. I am going to do it on the bike, not take all these parts off, so let's go. Now, this bit of the prep, I just decided to tackle it with a wire brush on a drill. Now, these drill bits are copper, I believe, not steel, so it's not quite as abrasive or harsh on the parts, but it did seem to do the job, because the paint on this was just so bad and so flaking that it didn't really need a lot of effort to get it all off. I'm just working the drill brush evenly around the engine, trying to get all that paint off and get back to a nice, smooth, scuffed up surface ready for when I paint it at a later time. Now, I did decide to take the timing cover off just because the drill brush was scratching it. I mean, the timing cover was pretty bad anyway, so we're probably going to replace that, but by taking it off, it leaves me with a nice even job, and I can get all around the edges of that timing cover housing. Okay, that's enough of that for a minute. Now I'm going to do something I definitely want to wear eye protection and probably a respirator for, because it's it might be a bit stupid. I have here one pressure washer attachment for the air compressor. Now, it's got a little thing that feeds off. I'm putting in some brake cleaner, so yeah, I'm gonna pressure wash some brake cleaner onto this bike and see what kind of dirt and whatever else comes off. Now, I'm not sure exactly how much of a smart decision this was, but usually after I prep a part, I'd wipe it down with brake cleaner anyway, and I'd blow any dust off using the airline. But this seemed to kill two birds with one stone, and actually it really helped if there were any flaky bits of paint. The combination of the brake cleaner, jetting it off with the air, seemed to help loosen up anything else that was left that I hadn't quite managed to reach. Okay, that kind of worked a bit. It definitely blew all the dust and stuff out, and then obviously went around with a brake cleaner to wash all the dust out. It's nice and dry. I've now jumped forward a little bit. Call me crazy, but like I said, I'm going to try and paint it on the bike. So I've masked off kind of the bits I definitely don't want to get overspray on. This primarily is what I want to spray, and obviously if I get some paint in there, fantastic. We'll work out how to do the fins later on. I'll mask everything back off if I have to, but as it stands, I'm still not sure exactly how we're dealing with that exhaust stud. So I may as well just do this bit while I can. Now, I know this might be frustrating to watch, me painting an engine on the bike without it being fully prepped properly. There's probably more masking off I could do, but I really just wanted to start painting this. At the end of the day, I'm doing a DIY, every man's kind of restoration. We're not doing anything crazy. I'm not doing anything nobody couldn't do at home. I just wanted to make things look better than what they were, and for me, the way forward was to just do it on the bike. Again, I'm not a professional. My technique is not fantastic, but I'm pretty confident it's going to come out a hell of a lot better than it started. And just to clarify, in case anyone's wondering, I am using black VHT paint because I am painting the engine, and the engine will get very hot, so it's important to use a paint that will withstand those temperatures. Okay, that might come back and bite me in the ass a bit, but I mean, it seems to look okay. I mean, that looks pretty good. I did go kind of halfway up the barrels, and I forgot to mask a bit up there, which I'm going to have to clean that off. That's going to be a pain in the ass. I should have removed this completely instead of masking it off, but I wasn't planning on going that high up. I just kind of ended up sending it, which was probably a bit stupid, but it's done now. So I've probably ended up making more work for myself than what I actually needed to there, because obviously I'm going to have to clean up some bits and then probably mask it all back off to paint the insides of the cylinders. Shouldn't have really gone that high. I should have just stopped where I was planning, but it is what it is. It's done now. But it's looking pretty cool. I mean, it's looking a bit of a two-faced bike now because that side's nice and black. And I didn't even do this side because, I don't know, I just got an idea in my head and I went for it. So I'm still going to have to do all of this side. Or half black, half crusty. I don't know. That'll look shit. Okay, moment of truth time on the painting. It has been about a week since I last even touched this bike, so the paint is nice and dry. It is looking pretty good, or hell of a lot better than it was before I started. So let's just carefully unmask everything, and we can see the results. Now, that is by no means flawless. It's obviously a bit dusty from where it's been sitting a couple of weeks. But that actually looks so much better. I think especially once the sprocket cover goes on as well, I think that'll look pretty good from this side. Obviously you need to clean these up a bit because they're kind of ruining the look a minute, but pretty damn good. Or pretty damn good from a distance anyway, because obviously I know if you get up close, there's a few little bits where I didn't quite get the paint in, and obviously the fins behind this bit are, well, they're not painted because I should have taken that off, but I totally forgot about it at the time. I think if I can manage a similar job to that side around this side, we're going to be looking so much better, and it's going to be a huge step forward for the bike. Now, logic would dictate that I start on this side, but there is a job that I need to do that's kind of not what I was planning on doing right now, but it needs doing. I need to give these shocks a bit of a clean up and put them back on the bike. And the reason they need to go back on the bike is because I need to move the bike to take it to someone in one of the other units to try and do a TIG weld on the broken exhaust stud. Now, I know we previously tried welding onto the broken exhaust stud, but we previously used a MIG weld. But apparently a TIG weld will heat up the stud, so the expansion should be better rather than just adding to it. I don't know, I know nothing about welding, but apparently a TIG weld might work, so it's worth a go. Now I have got here a set of the bolts for putting the shocks on. I got them on eBay for about 22 quid. They are quite widely available. They seem to be the same for a lot of the Harley models, or at least all the Sportsters. So they were pretty easy to get, but 22 quid for 4 bolts, that's a bit steep. Okay, so actually we'll just clean these up after. So you got 2 bolts, you got a threaded one and one with just a little bit of thread on the end. I believe the one with a little bit of thread goes through the bottom, and then you put a nut on the back, like so. And then the one with all the thread goes through the top. Let's try that again, see if it lines up now. And now we've gone too high, so come back a little bit. And there she is. And then repeat for the other side. Okay, with those now tightened back into place, the bike is now movable again, which means I haven't got to try and wheel this entire stand out down there, all the way down to the end unit on that uneven floor. I can now just get the bike off the bench and wheel it out, and that should give me a chance to actually tidy up the bench because it's looking pretty terrible. So we quickly spin the bench around, drop the lift, undo the ratchet straps and get the bike offloaded and down to the guy to try out some TIG welding. So time for one last roll of the dice to get this exhaust stud out without sending it off to someone to remove their engine to drill the exhaust stud out. So the guy who's doing this TIG welding, his name is Chris, and everybody that I know says he is the best TIG welder they know. He makes all sorts of custom fabrication parts and he really knows his stuff when it comes to welding. So if he can't do this, I'm pretty sure nobody else can do it with a weld. So this is the last roll of the dice. Now, I'm not entirely sure of the difference between TIG welding and MIG welding, but apparently with TIG welding, it will put more heat into the part that we're trying to move, which should help with the expansion, which should help free it. So when we've welded a stud or a nut or whatever Chris is using on, we should be able to turn the stud out. And that's what we're aiming for here. Now at this point we've given it a few attempts. Now nothing has worked so far, and he's literally put a nut over the stud and he is filling it full of weld and making that weld as strong as he can. You can see just there that it is absolutely glowing hot, so there is about as much heat as we can physically get in there as possible. And just to top it off, we're using a blowtorch on the side of the engine just to heat up the area around that stud as well, so that we allow him for as much expansion as possible to break the rust. Okay, sad times. The bike is back on the bench and all of our efforts to weld anything onto that exhaust stud to get it out of the head have failed. No matter how much heat we threw in there, I mean, it was literally glowing at one point. It is just stuck in that head solid. I wasn't totally convinced it was going to work because obviously we did try it originally with MIG welding bits on and everything snapped off, and same again with the TIG welding. So the only way that is coming out of the head is drilling out, and I'm in a new one tapped in, so that's going to have to go off to somebody else to do that. Which obviously is a good thing the shocks are still on, because obviously I can now move the bike. So if I need to put it in the van to take it somewhere, I can do that easily. And with the shocks on, it meant I can have the pad out the way, which does mean I can carry on tackling all this rustiness or bare metal, whatever, under the frame and round here on both sides just to tidy that up. So plan of attack down here, much like I've done with the other parts of the bike, is clean it up with the wire wheel, bit of the die grinder, just try and get back as much of the rust as I can. Then we'll throw on some rust treatment, and then we'll just go in with a good old hammerite and get it looking cleaner and tidier. So let's bust out the wire wheel. Okay, we're taking a fast forward here because I have been prepping this kind of when I've just had half hour here or there. I have jumped ahead and loosely masked it off, I should say, just to cover some of the more important bits from overspray. Let's go ahead and let's just send it. Let's just paint it and hope that it turns out half tidy like the other side. Again, as you can probably see already, my prep work this side wasn't quite as good as what it was the other side. I maybe rushed it a little bit and was a bit premature in my painting, but I am just hoping that it turns out somewhat decent at this point. Again, no real technique. The hardest bit for me on this side is literally just making sure I'm getting all the spray into the fins nice and evenly, and just getting a generally good coating all over the engine casing. Right, while the paint dries the other side, bang out our good old friend Cure Rust, and we're just going to treat all this rust, and then we can give it plenty of time to dry and set and do its magic before we start trying to hammerite over the rest of the frame. So we're just going to slap this on. I'm just going to work it into the rust as much as possible. And same again on the other side. We're going to be quite careful around this side because obviously I don't want to splash any on the engine because the engine is still drying. Okay, so while I wait for all the paint and the Cure Rust to dry, there's not really much more I can do, but I will say I have actually managed to get some parts this week. One part, the battery cover for this side of the bike. So that will go on something like that, which will look fantastic. It's a proper metal one as well, not those cheap Chinese plastic ones that you see everywhere with the chrome stripes. And rather excitingly for me, I've managed to get some bolts for the sprocket casing that I painted a couple of weeks ago. See, the sprocket cover goes on and sits there, which will look nice on this side of the engine, but can't put that on right now because obviously I need to finish painting the frame and everything, put the balance pipe on. The sprocket cover bolts look like this. They are three bolts, two long ones, one short one, and they were really difficult to track down. I searched everywhere online, couldn't really buy them as a set. I ordered some about 6 weeks ago from a Zodiac dealer, never heard anything since. So I looked up the part numbers for the bolts from the Harley parts catalogue, found the sizes online, then went down to Swansea Fasteners and they had them there. In black, Allen heads, exactly how I need them. Also got a little thing of like thread lock so that when I start to actually reassemble this, things are going in properly. So big shout out to Swansea Fasteners for these, because every time I've needed random or obscure bolts for this bike, I've found out the sizes, I've gone there and they've always had something on the shelf that works. And they treated me to this little bag, so big thanks to Swansea Fasteners. If anybody else needs anything, any obscure nuts and bolts, find out the size, check them out because they will probably have something there on the shelf for you. So in theory, once that is dry and it's paintable and then I put the hammerite on, we're done with the frame, which means the balance pipe can go back on, which means the sprocket casing will be able to go back on. Then the rear foot pegs and brake assembly can go back on because I'll be done with that section of the bike. Then of course, there's the rear rim to sort out. Something a bit more needs to be done with the front rim. And of course, the giant elephant in the room is still the exhaust stud. Now I've got a plan for that, which is probably going to set me back a little while, but it needs to be done. Now obviously I've tried two different types, or had professionals try two different types of welding, and the stud isn't coming out. So it's going to have to be drilled out, which either means cylinder head off or engine out to drill it out. I'm not really sure, but that means the bike is going to go off to a professional to do that. Now I believe that is happening between Christmas and New Year. So it does mean we're not going to see the Harley for a little while. But with it also being the run up to Christmas and me being a delivery driver, it does mean I am working round the clock, which is why you didn't get a video last week and you're probably not going to get a video from me next week. Because as much as I'd love to commit all my time to YouTube, I still work full time and this is the busiest time of the year for me. So we probably won't see the Harley now until the new year, but by then I should have the tank painted, I should have the exhaust stud out, and we'll pretty much be on reassembly and finishing off a few minor bits, ready to take it for an MOT. So if I have got some spare time, you may see a video, probably me reassembling the Melody, because there's only about a day's work left realistically to reassemble that. And I am planning a bit of a Christmas special with a bit of a Temu build. I'll give you a little teaser, but that's about all I can tell you right now. But that is going to be a lot of fun if everything goes to plan. But all that aside, I hope you've enjoyed this video anyway. I apologize for the lack of video last week and probably the lack of videos over the Christmas period. And obviously if this one's been a bit all over the place, and not as slick as what you used to, then, you know, it is what it is at the minute. I am trying my best. And all progress is still good progress. Now, if you're only here for the Harley videos, then make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss this bike coming back at the start of the new year. And if you're here for everything else, then make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what I have got coming up over this Christmas period. So, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.